Dear brethren, our subject is Crucified 4, the Battle of Armageddon. It's rather interesting to note, dear brethren, that this volume was published in 1897. And he wrote this book as though it were a history book relating to the historical events of World War, World Revolution, World Anarchy, including Jacob's Trouble. When writing this volume, it was not intended for the world, but to forewarn and forearm, comfort, to encourage, to strengthen the Lord's people as to the harsh events that would follow. Out of God's mercy, he instructs his people for the sake of avoiding traveling down the road of despair. You see, our dear Brother Russell, in his forecast, indicated that the World War would begin in 1914, fall of 1914. In 1904, 10 years in advance. And of course, we find more information regarding the subject in Volume 2. And so we realize that our dear pastor had forecasted this event 10 years in advance. It is also interesting to remark that there were some immature thoughts expressed in this book because there are only 2 notes in the back of the book. It would seem that our dear Brother Russell, so to speak, had a good grip on this subject, and he had his arms around this understanding. It's also interesting to note that he did not refer as a scriptural reference in this book relating to the various paragraphs and information that was contained therein. He did not use Revelation 16th chapter, verse 16, to support the thought of Armageddon with the day of vengeance. Armageddon in this text is a Hebrew word meaning the hill of Megiddo, or mount of destruction. As Brother Russell so states on page 527, he makes this statement: so complex and peculiar will be the conflict of this day of vengeance that no one symbol could describe it. Our dear Brother Russell had made reference to Daniel's, the 12th chapter, verses 1 through 4 and verse 10. But let us take here, brethren, Daniel's the the 12th chapter, verses 1 through 4. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of the people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to the same time, and at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And for the sake of time, brethren, let us go to verse 4. Very significant. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Yeah, I should say Isaiah referred to this time of trouble as described in Daniel's 12th chapter. And we find that it's also referenced in Malachi, the 4th chapter, verse 1. Behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. The Apostle James in the 5th chapter, verses 1 through 6, says that the rich man shall weep and howl for the miseries that shall come upon them. And Joel, the 2nd chapter, verse 2, describes a day of clouds and thick darkness. And Amos, the 5th chapter, verse 20, says, darkness and not light, even very dark, and no brightness in it. And of course, our Lord refers to this period of time in Matthew, the 24th chapter, verses 21 and 22, as a time of great tribulation. We are told of this day of vengeance, or by the Battle of Armageddon. It refers to world war, and it refers to world revolution and world anarchy. And he also makes mention of Jacob's trouble. And then that still small voice introducing the kingdom. And we know, dear brethren, by the Epiphany truth, just because we're discussing this end time, when the kingdom is established, we know that some of the people that will be living at that time, and when they are if you will, if they enter into the kingdom, for those when the ransom merit is applied, we know that these individuals will not be required to taste death. And we find this thought, dear brethren, in volume 15, page 221 through 227, and volume 17, page 279. It's also interesting to note that Brother Russell did not use 1 Kings, the 19th chapter, verses 11 and 12, in the reading material of this book. However, in the editor's preface, our dear Brother Johnson makes mention of 1 Kings, the 19th chapter, verses 11 and 12. And he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mountain." Now, this is a reference to Elijah's vision. And he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains." Now, we as Bible students, dear friend, we understand that mountains represent kingdoms. And break in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. We understand this related to Revelation, the 7th chapter, verse 1. "And after the wind, an earthquake." Revelation 16th chapter, verses 16 through 18. "And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake." And in verse 12, "And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." We would notice in our verses 11 and 12, we notice that the Lord was not in the wind. The Lord permitted the wind. And that it was, as Brother Russell makes comment, that it was humanity. Our dear Brother Russell informs us in the author's foreword that the increase of knowledge, found in Daniel's 12th chapter, verse 4, that they shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Brother Russell understood this. And he made reference to 1 Kings, the 19th chapter, verses 11 and 12, as early as 1879, in reprints, page 66. With the increase of knowledge comes wealth. With the increase of wealth comes discontent and fear, which brings Armageddon, or the day of vengeance of God upon the whole world. You see, in God's providence, He allowed these things to happen. God's purpose to permit the day of vengeance is to bring the human family back into harmony with Him. And to this end, He first allows them to learn by bitter experiences and the terrible consequences of sin. We thank our loving Creator, our beneficent Creator, that His chastenings are in all wise providence for our good, and that He does that because He loves mankind so much that He has provided also for their salvation. God was not under any obligation to provide salvation for the world of mankind. He has done so. And gives them punishments and corrections necessary for them to receive it. And we read in Hebrews the 12th chapter, verses 5 through 11, Revelation the 3rd chapter, verse 19. When his judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. Let us turn to Isaiah, if you will. Isaiah the 26th chapter, verse 9. Isaiah the 26th chapter, verse 9. With my soul have I desired thee in the night. Yea, with my spirit within me, I will seek thee early. When thy judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. You see, dear brethren, prior to World War, the large nations had been fearful of each other's prosperity. Now, Brother Russell expresses the thought, dear brethren, is because of knowledge that will bring wealth, discontent, and fear. The strong nations were fearful because the weaker nations were gaining in wealth as well. But the stronger nations were fabulously growing richer and richer. We had a brother that made mention that the first steamboat was in 1807, and that the first steam car was in 1831, and that the first telegraph was in 1844. Fearing that something would occur to hinder their enrichment and turn the streams of wealth to the ports of their competitors. Now, we find these thoughts, dear brethren, in the author's preface, or I should say, the author's foreword, as what caused World War. It is absolutely impossible, dear brethren, as the speaker was meditating upon this subject of the Battle of Armageddon. It was just too enormous. And that's why the statement by Brother Russell on page 527, that it was necessary, perhaps, if we were to paint a picture, to give us a better understanding of the Battle of Armageddon. And so the richer and stronger nations, they were fearful of the weaker nations. They feared each other, determined that the war must come. Because they feared that the weaker nations would gain more and more strength, more knowledge, more wealth, and that would take a bigger chunk out of the lion's share, if you will. And the present was chosen at the most favorable opportunity before the weaker became too strong in taking a larger portion of the lion's share. Thus, World War Phase 1. Now we understand, brethren, that World War Phase 2, Brother Russell had no idea. As our text continues, we notice that there will be an earthquake. Now, how did Brother Russell translate this or interpret it? He understood it meant world revolution. World revolution. We notice that the earthquake, earth, is a symbol of human society that will quake and shake. The nominal church systems of the world will rise to great prominence after World War Phase 1. And again, in connection with the civil powers, we can readily see the grounds for this. This was the cause for world revolution, as Brother Russell so indicates it in this volume. However, after World War, the nations were greatly weakened financially. They realized the necessity for keeping dominating grip upon the public and preventing anything akin to socialism and or anarchy. And they will naturally look to the great religious institutions called churches to support them, church and state, to threaten the people with future torments, and in general to help keep the ship of state from being overturned. The churches also will be ready and glad for such an opportunity. Already they are rolling together, Protestantism with Roman Catholicism. They were opposed, yet they were connected as part of a scroll, rolling together, but not actually coming together. Each side united together to the best of their ability. Then very shortly will come a complete overthrow and distraction of present Gentile governments, symbolically represented in the Bible as a great conflagration which will consume the whole earth, all institutions, religious, social, political, and financial. According to the Bible, it is after an increased stormy interval to be followed by sudden worldwide revolution. Our dear brother Russell shares with us that the cause for revolution would be, in his thought, was knowledge and selfishness. But when you think about the word anarchy, lawlessness, we see two opposing forces, those that are lawless and those who are lawful. World anarchy follows world revolution, which will overthrow the present forms of Satan's empire in state, aristocracy, and religion. It is the fourth volume that Brother Russell more particularly treats of the second phase in this great tribulation. meaning world revolution. What is the purpose? God's purpose is to bring back the human family in harmony with Him. If the kingdom were to be established, would men's hearts accept that kingdom? Brother Russell said there would be friction. And so it was necessary for world war. But we find that by experiences of our own, we know that men's hearts did not melt. Men's hearts were not compatible, seeking after the Lord. And the very fact that revolution follows world war is an indication that mankind was not yet prepared to receive the kingdom. And so world revolution was necessary. But even after world revolution, has world revolution occurred yet? No. But in our pastor's forecast, he recognized that world war would take place in the fall of 1914. We all know that this forecast was correct. Do we not see revolution in our society today? I think we all do, especially here in Chicago. People revolting. The police against the citizens of Chicago. But don't we also see anarchy? Don't we see these people looting? This is a form of anarchy, brother. And how we see these two things seem to be overlapping with each other. Now I have read, and I can't remember the reference, brethren, but and you'll forgive me for saying this, but Brother Johnson indicated that on February of 1929, Mussolini signed a treaty with the Pope and a concordance. And if I remember correctly, and don't quote me on this, brethren, but it's just as a point of information that perhaps we could think about. With that being said, brethren, Brother Russell also makes mention of these three phases. He makes mention of Jacob's trouble. He makes mention of that future kingdom in chapter 11, the Battle of Armageddon. I think my time's up. Brethren, may the Lord add his blessings to these thoughts. Amen.